Hello everyone, this is Richard Eaton, your CTEC 134 Database Administration instructor. This video primarily is to introduce you to core relational database management system concepts and terms. Before I get into that, I would like to mention that I've discovered that if I try to post these videos on YouTube, it bucks whenever the file exceeds 8 or 9 minutes. So I'm trying to keep these videos short. And that means that most of them will probably have to have several parts to them. Before we get into the core concepts, I want to mention that to you that I have documents that I've posted in Canvas that should be helpful to you. One of them is lecture notes that I prepare for each class. And I have them already these lecture notes I have already opened up in a Word document on my computer. And you can find this same document in Canvas. Another document that I have already opened up, and I do this for make things a little bit faster, is a document called Relational Database Management System Important Definitions. And this can also be found in Canvas under Course Documents. So let's get going. I think what I want to do first is briefly look at my lecture notes. These lecture notes are a modification of what I typically do for face-to-face classes, and I've modified them as best I can anyway for an online-only class. And the first item here for week 2 was to familiarize you with SQL Server and SQL Server Management Studio. And I've already presented a document, a video document, and some step-by-step instructions on how to do that. And so today, we're going to focus on fundamental database concepts. And given the enough time, we will actually look at the TAL Distributors database using SQL Server Management Studio. In Canvas, some of the things that you'll find in course documents are things like installing SQL Server 2017. There are some SQL scripts that we use for practicing with SQL Server. The important definitions document, which I've already opened, and I've also posted PowerPoint presentations from the Guide to SQL textbook. One other thing that might be useful to you as you get to go through this class is to do some Google searches for some answers or some better understanding. And then this website, w3schools.com, is an excellent website for learning SQL Server concepts. I'm going to move over to the document, the definition document. And what I want you to focus on are just the first 6 items here: database, entity, relation, attribute, table, and relationship. And you don't have to pay too much attention to the other definitions because we'll cover those in subsequent videos. A database is a structure that can house information about various types of entities and about relationships among entities. And I think both textbooks use the term entity, Chapter 1 in the Database Administration Fundamentals textbook, and I think it's Chapter 1 or 2 in the Guide to SQL textbook. An entity is an object, like a person, place, or thing. And you can think of it as like a noun, for example. A noun is a person, place, or thing. An example of an entity in a database might be a table or a relation holding employee information, or a table holding order information, or students, or class information, or inventory items. And for every entity that we discover in our, well, let's see, how do you say it? When we're designing a database, we examine various criteria that's required, and then we try to identify what we think are the entities. And then each entity eventually will become a table in our database. But that table, the formal name for a table is a relation, and it's a two-dimensional table made up of columns and rows. Formally, you'll see in some textbook definitions that a relation has attributes, but informally we say we don't refer to it as a table, as a relation. We refer to it as a table, and we don't say the table has attributes. We say it has columns in it. But just know that these are synonymous. Columns, fields, and attributes are what goes into each table. And then a table has rows in it. In other words, they're entire records. The formal name is a tuple, but we'll never really use that word tuple. We use the word rows or records. Most commonly, I would use the word records to describe each entry into a table. An attribute is a property of an entity. And an example is, for students, we might have a student ID column, and a student name column, and a student address column, and so on. A table, as I've said earlier, is the same thing as a relation. And a relationship is the association between two columns. And we'll learn that that we form those relationships by having a column or a field in both tables that contain the same values, the same type of definition and the same values. And we use those common columns in those two tables to join them together. And we have several ways that we can join two tables together. They can be in what's called a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship, or a many-to-many relationship. And we'll learn more about that here in a subsequent video. So I think that's all we need to do in this particular document. I'm going to switch back to my lecture notes document, and look at some examples of entities and attributes. As I said earlier, an entity is a person, place, or thing. It's like a noun. An example in the Talent Distributors database is we have sales reps, we have customers, we have parts, and we have orders. And each of those entities become tables, and they have attributes. We call them columns or fields, and they describe that particular entity. Here, look at this statement right here that briefly describes the Clark College. Clark College teachers teach students about various subjects. Okay? Classes are taught in classrooms based on quarterly schedules. So if we were to examine that and say, well, what are the entities in here? And what should the attributes be for those entities? And then ultimately, after we identify the entities, we would create tables in SQL Server and columns or fields for each of those entities. In this statement down here, I have underlined what I see as the entities in this statement. The entities I have underlined are teachers, college teachers. A teacher is a person, place, or thing. They teach students. That's another entity. And there are classes that Clark College conducts. That's an entity. And there are classrooms, and there are quarterly schedules. So I've underlined 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that I think would ultimately become tables in a relational database. So I think that's enough for now. We'll start another video and we'll examine the TAL distributors database, and we'll look at all 5 tables and discuss how they're related, and how we work with different ways of relating tables to each other.